while we're getting the PowerPoint up and running, I can start talking about my agenda. First, I'm going to talk about what some of the literature says. There are a few people that have had a couple of books they've been talking about. When I looked through the program, all I kept seeing was the word vocabulary. I kept seeing linking routine or links. And so it's a real great time right now to be studying vocabulary, and that's kind of my area of specific. So I'm going to talk about some of the literature base that's going to be helpful for you to take research to practice in the classroom. I'm also going to talk about some of the devices that we use here with the SIB model that can apply, and it's more than your traditional links, okay? This is just talking about how I've had one of those days. This is talking about just showing the importance of vocabulary, not just as knowing a definition, but the language. You cannot separate the linguistics out of the whole idea of concepts when we're talking about vocabulary. And that's where we can have fun with games with some of the kids, and I'll show you some of those ways. So, England and some others went ahead and did this huge monograph on vocabulary learning. They really focused on morphology, and he basically said the growth of knowledge is one of essential prerequisites for language acquisition and to the acquisition of reading competence. Thanks. We have this general linear idea of how vocabulary works. We have this vocabulary knowledge, and then poof, it becomes our reading comprehension, right? And it's what happens between there that Isabella Beck talks about is a little bit confusing. We don't know. It's squishy. We don't know exactly what happens between knowing the meaning of a word to actually really comprehending it. It's far beyond just the decoding piece and then vocabulary. There's lots of things that go on in between, and I'm going to talk about some of those. There's topic knowledge. There's this idea of general ability that we bring to the table when we're talking about learning vocabulary, and it really starts with language. I would argue to have a pre-K and a 1 through 3rd grade language programs that focus huge on developing new vocabulary. Not so much just, I'm not talking grammar, but just the talking and the different meanings and the depth of vocabulary. And then, go ahead, in the 80s, here's just a little trend of how some things happened. We have direct instruction was very important. This was somewhere we went. Then we went to know the meaning and context. We keep hearing about how important context is. Well, guys, it's not really that important. That's what we're finding out through the literature. We're combing through some of the old stuff in the 80s, and we're finding out, you know what? Context isn't necessarily it. And then to infer meanings through morphological knowledge. And there I'm kind of getting into the prefix, the suffix, the roots. And from about 3rd to 5th grade, England says, that is the time to really get into the morphology with the kids, knowing the meanings, not just identifying what it looks like, the word or the spelling, but now let's take it up to the next notch and let's make sure they know the meanings. Several studies have suggested, this was, when you think about this, suggests that school children acquire words at the rate of not hundreds, but rather thousands per year. Not several per week, but rather several per day. When you think about that, it's overwhelming to think, how in the world am I going to teach vocabulary, enough vocabulary? We talk about the gap that we have right now in vocabulary with kids from lower SES coming to the table with not as much vocabulary. It's so hard. It's that Matthew effect. They're never going to catch up, basically, with their peers who are on level. And so we're trying to scramble. How do we close that gap? How do we get them to know several words per day? So some of the directions that the studies went after the 80s, after all this research said, okay, let's do this, let's do that, people said vocabulary size. Maybe you've heard of Beck. Luann Todd, she's doing a little seminar on vocabulary. She covered Bringing Words to Life, Isabella Beck's book. I don't know if anyone went to that, but this whole idea of word counting and vocabulary size became very important. Prefixes and suffixes, but they left out the roots. They left out trying to memorize meanings of roots. which we find are very important because 90% of the derived roots in our language come from Latin or Greek. And the last one, metacognition strategies, and that's actually where we found the place with the whole learning strategies. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, this is the book I was talking about, Isabella Beck's book. Go ahead. She talks about, this is an awesome book, and these books that I show you, I highly recommend to you. She talks about types of words. Okay, I know vocabulary is important, but what words do I pick? How do I decide which words are important? She talks about these different tiers. Tier 2 words are the words to teach. They're high frequency words for mature language users, so they're going to be a little bit above. They're going to be just helping the kids grasp a little bit more. And then they're fairly general but sophisticated. One way to look at it is to think of that higher level word that would take maybe about 3 or 4 words that are underneath it that you have to know that make up that concept of that word that you're trying to teach. Does that make sense? Kind of, maybe. That's what you want to do. You want to give them language to talk about the concept you're trying to teach. I'll talk more about that if that... I'm going to do that, so thanks. Well, here's the criteria for identifying. You want importance and utility, instructional potential. Can you use this throughout your lessons, throughout the novel you're going to talk about? Are they in the textbook when you read a play? So not just talking about language arts, but also in maybe science or social studies or whatnot. The conceptual understanding. The general concept is understood, but precision and specificity is provided in describing the content. And that's that latter part we were talking about that I'm going to give you an example with here in a second. Now, to make this funny and to get it, what do you have to know? You got to know what pine means. And what else? Maybe pork. You have to know what porcupine is, what a porcupine is, right? Okay, to get that, to make it. So when we talk about language, using humor and the play on words are so important in bringing kids in and bringing them along to understanding it. So yeah, this could be a good lesson for piquing their interest about what does pine mean? What's it mean to pine? Pine tree? Pine cone? What are you talking about? So this is another awesome book to get, Marzano. This is what Sue Woodruff's whole presentation was about, Marzano, and his 6, go ahead and do the next, his 6 steps for effective vocabulary. Plus, if you're a content area person, a little bit more in the secondary ed, he has a great list in the appendix of content area critical words. Oh, go back one. It's building background knowledge. And it's so important how important prior knowledge is. So he says, provide description, explanation, example of the new term. He then says to go ahead and reinstate an explanation of the term in their own words, so that idea of paraphrasing. He talks about giving the non-linguistic, that little picture like in links, maybe, some sort of little picture representation. Also to do activities that help them to add to their knowledge, make it fun, interactive, and ask the students to discuss the terms with each other. Once they use it and start making it their own, that's when it becomes part of their vocabulary. That's when they have a word. And the last one, whatever it said. I don't know. Oh, wait. Oh, ask the students to get involved in games. So that's kind of the whole theme. You're fine. Go to the next one. If you are a language arts, an English person in elementary or middle school, get this book. This is awesome. There's actually a newer version out. It's teaching vocabulary in all classrooms. She has a section on students with disabilities. She has a section on content areas, specifically how to teach vocabulary. And she walks you through step by step of different ideas and games. It's an awesome. One of the things that came to when the gist of this book basically is word learning is not an all or nothing proposition, like a switch that turns on and off. A better metaphor is one which you have the light dimmer, in which you can gradually turn it up to see everything come into focus. That is vocabulary. You have such a concrete level, and you can take it to such a higher level. It's all those different shades and nuances of a word that we need to get kids in touch with. So, this is Amelia Bedelia. Anybody remember her? Yeah. I love it. Amelia Bedelia, the sun will fade the furniture. I asked you to draw the drapes, said Miss Rogers. I did, see? She held up her picture. So that whole play on words with drawing, for elementary kids, these books are awesome. They're teaching the concept more than just, I love them. So I know, yeah, absolutely. This book is a handbook. Okay, and I'm not saying it's a handbook if you are a vocabulary person, if you are a reading teacher of any kind. My professor in graduate school actually handed this to me, and I'm like, I'll never teach vocabulary. Sat on my shelf, never touched it. About 3 years ago, this book became my world. So it is so important. It's so easy to read. It's easy to go through. It gives you hands-on everything. By William Nagy, Teaching Comprehension. It's an older one, 88. But it's still really good. One way that vocabulary instruction can be structured to ensure a focus on concepts rather than on the labels that we use with the words, make sure the instructor starts with the meaning of a word without mentioning that word itself. Okay? So we're talking all around it. It's those different shades of a word. Let me see. Oh, I have it here with me. I want to read you. Here's something you can do with one of your kids. Actually, take them through. Have you ever had that feeling that something was going to go wrong, that something bad was going to happen? Not that you had any good reason to think that. It's just that sort of feeling that came over you. Has anyone had such a feeling? Did something bad actually happen when you had that feeling? Okay, so you start talking about this. What's a word that I'm describing? Premonition. Any other? A threat? Dread. Okay. See the different layers of how you can talk around a word, and premonition is the one, but we could throw on other layers and say, okay, dread. And then starting to classify what is, going from being totally content to maybe totally fearful and anxious, and what's the different shades of words between. So this book's awesome. 3 properties he talks about: integration, and you can do it through semantic mapping, semantic feature analysis, which I gave you an example of in the second set of handouts, having hierarchical and linear arrays and Venn diagramming. Our stuff from the center hits on a lot of these. All the content enhancement by Janice Bulgren really hits some of the stuff, and I'll show you how to tie it in. Repetition. Let them hear it over and over again, and not just in the same way, using the same meaning, throw in a different meaning of it, like the pine, okay, and porcupine. And then also meaningful use. This talks about the depth of processing. We can give them that whole array, the breadth of knowledge, but there's also this eye of depth of a word. And so kind of taking that word and turning it upside down and seeing how many different ways you can use it. Another great book. I think in the PowerPoints these came through, so you'll be able to get them if you'd like, with just this information on Google in it or something. But include definition and context for each of the words. It's not that context is bad, you guys. As I mentioned earlier, it's just not the only way to go. It needs to be jazzed up. You need to do specific things with it. Actively learning and multiple exposures again and meaningful information. You're going to start hearing themes, I think, come out over what all the literature is saying about what we need to do to teach vocabulary. Make it enjoyable. This is teaching the word meanings. It depends on the word itself, as we talked about, because there's so many different meanings. Teach the word more than just the targeted words. And that's the one we were talking about if you had, say, premonition was the targeted word, but you may want to make sure they could use fearful, worry, some of those words that they already know that can make it their language so they can make the jump to learning this new word, premonition. Multiple meanings. Oh, and the whole idea about enjoyable, which I've said several times. Go ahead. These are fun games to do with kids. Have them make up their own words. What's he saying? Say, what's a good word for nut with hair on it? Mustachio. So And I mean, yeah, you get moans and groans depending on if it's first hour or third. But playing word games, the kids love that stuff. Stahl says, teaching word meanings should be a way for students to define their world, to move from light to dark to a more fine-grained description of the colors that surround us. So kind of that spectra of a word I was talking about earlier. All righty. Graves, one more. Oh, he talks about middle school programs. Any middle school teachers in here? Okay, he mentions wide reading. Come across various words. We learn them through wide reading, although the research doesn't say if you're a bad reader, do you pick up words. It's only if you're already a good reader, you get a larger vocabulary. Teaching the individual words. The strategies to help them learn independent, and this is what takes us to the strategy stuff, so go ahead and just let's talk about SIM real quick. Semantic feature, semantic mapping, SFA, and semantic grouping. These kind of are a nice cluster to use interchangeably and together. There's another way, go ahead. Possible sentences, has anybody heard of that one? Okay. Concept development approaches, which we have some that I'm going to share. And then comparing and contrasting, we know. Is there one? Okay. Semantic mapping. So here, we get the semantic mapping right here. You don't need a links device to teach vocabulary. You start getting at it. This is that creating that awareness of words. When you start making your bubbles and doing your whole unit organizer, you start to make kids aware of the language that you're going to use in this section. So, semantic feature analysis. Anybody used these before? These are fun, but they're also scary. You can't just go out and do these on a whim. You got to plan a little bit ahead, just like when you use your organizers and so forth. It helps you get the nuances of words. Go ahead. Oh, another example. The math teachers are always the ones that are most fearful of that they cannot teach vocabulary in their content area. This is just a perfect example of how vocabulary can be handled through conceptual ways in their area. Almighty Spinks, tell me what the difference between ignorance and apathy. And this is actually Jean's favorite one. I don't know, and I don't care. We're running just a little bit late. Is that okay? Semantic grouping, you can, right here, math teachers who are fearful of teaching vocabulary and don't know how to teach vocabulary. Here is a way of grouping that gets you to teaching concepts through vocabulary using our frames. The next one, possible sentences. Now this I put in your little packet. I gave you a semantic feature analysis, the additional one besides PowerPoint, and I also gave you an activity with the possible sentences. It's an easy activity to do, but it was a little bit lengthy, so I thought I would just talk about it real quick. You want to choose 8 to 10 words. This is going to Isabella Beck, that Bringing Words to Life book, that first bright orange one I showed you. She talks about this, and she takes you through step by step. If there's one book, well, I recommend all 4 of those, but that's a very good book to have right now because she helps you practice and go through the steps of doing this with your kids. Choose the 8 words that might cause difficulty. Go ahead and add an additional 4 to 6 words that they're likely to know because you want them to know it so they have the language to talk about these new words and integrate them. Have the students generate these sentences. You write them up on the board or on a word wall, whatever you want to do, you write them up. You got to make sure they use 2 or more of the words together, okay? You don't say it's a good sentence, bad sentence, or ugly. You just let them make their sentences until all the words are used. So if we had front, barometer, humidity, air mass, air pressure, meteorology, this is what I want the kids. These are the challenge words that I may be teaching them. I add in known words. I know they know high, rain, clouds, predict. They can use those. The next thing we want to do is write the sentences on the board. You just ask them to generate some in groups, pairs, however. Don't worry if they're right or wrong. Take all of them. Read a passage now from a text that's going to incorporate these words, that's going to help them learn new meanings. So it may be the first chapter of the book, it may be some passage you pull from some other resource. And then after that's done, now you go back and evaluate the sentences that are on the board. Some are going to be right on, others may need to be tweaked. It's that evaluating of the words that's going to be priceless for the kids to see that process go on. How are we doing, guys? I'm like rushing through this so fast. I haven't even stopped to breathe to ask you. Is this okay? Any? Okay, don't be afraid to ask questions. I know we're short, but that's all right. In the concept development, there's the Frere model, if anyone's heard of that one. You want to identify critical attributes. You want to name in which the category it belongs to. You want to discuss examples and non-examples. Is there what does this go with in SIM, in our content enhancement? Any? Go ahead. There you go, concept mastery. Does this do it or not? And it even pulls in the elements when you start doing the little tryout word there in the middle. Pulls in the elements of semantic mapping. Okay? So it's good stuff. Clarifying. Right there, examples, non-examples, the clarifiers, the characteristics, all these things that research says we need to do to teach word meanings and concepts right here. Comparing and contrasting, we have one of those. Yep. We also have, anchoring table. This one, people either love it or hate it, I've found. And I think they would love it more if they could take their content and use something you've already taught to the kids. Let's say you went through a unit on decision making, but now you want to find something else to compare it to. I guess it's hard to come up with those analogies, but when we take something that the kid already knows and tie it to something new, we know that that's the strongest link. I mean, that's all the research on links, okay, the vocabulary strategy. But if we use that, it's going to really help the kids. It's like I guess I'm asking us to stretch ourselves a bit with the analogy one. There's lots of research that says analogies and metaphors are it in helping them understand. Marzano talks about that too. Yeah. Go past that. Here's a way of categorizing and comparing. Okay, with the frame. We even different levels. As we go down in the level, we're making sure everything is parallel across, and they're working on different levels and working, I don't know. I'm not going to explain it, but you just basically, you have your categories. And categorizing is a huge part of vocabulary learning. All righty. I think there was one more. Go back. Oh, no. I guess not. Okay, go. Go ahead. Yeah. All right. So NIST and Olnick say to provide definitions, use samples. This is kind of like some new research where my new research is going, because I found a hole based off of everything I told you where we need to go next, where there's not any explicit programs going on with it. Greek and Latin roots and their derivations. Multiple exposures and interactions with words. So this has led me, go ahead, to when I read England's piece. As children progress through the grades about 1 through 5, so does their comprehension of morphological problem solving. The whole idea of prefix and suffixes and roots and words, how they go together, suffixes with their derivational and inflectional, the whole parts of speech. And sometimes we don't want to touch that. It's scary if you're not well rehearsed in it and know all of it. But that's where my research is going, is towards, takes on a different meaning, doesn't it, in that context? So, it's going into this whole morphological learning of root words. And so that's something we're working on here at the center right now. But ladies, do you have any questions? I'm sorry to just whiz through that so quick. Okay, is it doable? Are these things you can take back and look at vocabulary in a different way? Those concept, the trilogy is what I call them, concept mastering, concept anchoring, concept comparison, that is teaching vocabulary. It really is. We have to move beyond links as our only way, because it doesn't teach the varieties. It's just there's lacking. It teaches how to study a meaning of one word in that context. We need to move beyond that for our kids. So, if you have any questions, I'll be up here. But thank you for coming in, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Good job.
Dang, I didn't have to speed through as fast, I guess.
Well, I think it is, though.
Cool. It is about time.